See, I knew there was more to this than what I had thought. You know, and the funny thing is, the information is out there too, whether you're looking on the internet or in a book by Ian Stevenson. Now, what am I talking about? Reincarnation. My name is Chris Shaw, and my experience with reincarnation has been that funny feeling I get in the pit of my stomach whenever I drive past a big oil refinery or a big industrial complex. You know the feeling that I'm talking about, kind of a cross between nervousness and deja vu all at the same time? And I've asked myself the question, is it possible that a previous life's experience can somehow affect my current life? I guess it would make sense if there really is something to reincarnation. Now, as you watch the following, I ask that you keep an open mind so you can decide whether you've ever lived in another life.
Reincarnation or rebirth means that there really is no such thing as death. It means that a man or woman is not a physical body, but rather that the body is a suit of clothes for the inner person. It means that life continues in an unbroken stream, now in this condition, now in that condition. It is a grand unbroken cycle of birth, growth, adulthood, old age, death, reflection in a spirit realm, and rebirth. Life thus becomes a school with opportunities to experience life in various cultures and situations. In modern America, a small number of pioneers have been researching reincarnation, taking various approaches. Foremost among these is Dr. Ian Stevenson, who for over 40 years has been studying children who appear to remember details from their previous lives. His book, 20 Cases Suggestive of Reincarnation, outlines these cases in rigorous scientific detail.
The main thing about Stevenson's methods that appealed to me was that he had found a very interesting phenomenon, which is children who are just learning how to speak. Some of their first utterances are things like, "You're not my father," or "You're not my mother," or "My house is bigger than this," or I live in another town. I want to go back to my village." Or they'll say something like, "We don't eat food prepared that way. We eat it prepared in a different way. And I don't have 3 sisters. I have 2 brothers and a sister." And it goes on like that. And these are impressive because where an adult could come up with all sorts of information from a lifetime of reading, of seeing movies, of talking to people, these children who are just learning to speak have a very limited amount of experience from which to draw information. So when they specifically name a person, say, "I was so-and-so and I lived in such and such a village," and you can find that person did exist in that village that was named. And when the child makes 20, 30, 40 statements about the person who had lived in that village, and most or all of them turn out to be at least fairly accurate, you have to ask yourself, where did the child get this information from? My book, which is called Old Souls, recounts the 2 trips that I took with him, and really my struggle to come to grips with what I was seeing and to try to find a way to explain it. So the first thing I wanted to see when I went on these trips was, are these really solid cases? Or will I sit down with Stevenson at the first interview and, see right away that these people are either lying or they're being led, or they're not saying what Stevenson had carefully recorded them saying. And I thought that that was a possibility, and that was certainly what some of his critics would have you believe. But from the very beginning, it was clear that these people were saying exactly what Stevenson had reported in his case studies.
My interest in reincarnation isn't so much a personal interest as if I like the idea of myself personally reincarnating. I'm actually, like other philosophers, interested in what human beings are. And the standing debate between philosophers has been whether human beings are more than just bodies governed by the laws of physics. If you take these cases seriously, you will have to conclude that the best available explanation for this data is that some people do reincarnate. And what people will say is, well, you know, there are all sorts of alternative explanations to the data. Some people deny that there's data. Some people say people like Stevenson and others make it up. And by the data, I mean, as we sit, there are at least 6,000 to 7,000 cases, strong cases, that have strong logical characteristics, but probably 250 reasonably close to being ideal cases, where the subjects have all the memories of the former subjects, memories that only the former subject could have. They have the skills the other person had, even skills that couldn't be learned, like playing an instrument or speaking a foreign language that they hadn't been taught. And they'll have body scars where they receive wounds that killed them, their mortal wounds. There are at least 250, 300 cases that are very strong that way. And so people say, well, that's not enough. You know, well, how much is enough? The question is, explain the data in the best cases.
Cases of children remembering their past lives are not limited to countries where a belief in reincarnation is prevalent. There are also American cases, though these children tend not to remember as many details as their counterparts in India. Carol Bowman, author of Children's Past Lives and Return from Heaven, investigates these cases and educates parents about the importance of listening to their children's stories.
The truth is, we really don't know how common it is in the United States because most parents haven't been exposed to the idea that this can happen before my book came out. That's really the first time that this idea has been mainstreamed. So what I'm finding is, as people are finding out about the phenomenon, they have the, oh, that's what that was experience, where they identify it in their own experience when they were children, or they relate back to something a child may have said when they were young, or hopefully what a child is saying in present. When my book came out, my daughter's language arts teacher in high school embarrassed her by reading the first 2 chapters. But after he read the introductory chapters, out of 22 kids in the class, 3 thought that they had had past life experiences when they were little. After talking to many parents about their children's memories, I kept hearing the same things over and over again. I found that there were common features to these memories, and I distilled these features into what I call the 4 signs of past life memory. And the first sign is matter-of-fact tone. When children speak of memories, they're very serious, direct, and you can tell they're not joking around. When children talk about a fantasy, you can tell there's a lilting quality to the voice, and they, oh, and this happened, and then this happened. But it's, with past life memory, it's very direct and serious, which immediately gets our attention. And the second sign is consistency over time. When children speak of their past life memories, they tell us the same stories with the same details over days, weeks, months, and even over a couple of years. And when children, especially 2- and 3-year-olds, make up a fantasy story, they usually don't remember it the next day, let alone the next week. So that's another indication. And the third sign is knowledge beyond experience. Children will speak of things that you know they haven't learned in their 2 or 3 years of experience. They can talk about what it's like to die in the trenches of World War I, and you know that they've never been exposed to that information. The fourth sign is corresponding behaviors and traits. A child may tell a past life story and may have a phobia relating to the story. For example, in my son's case, he spoke of dying on a battlefield, and he had a phobia of loud booming sounds, which related to the past life experience. So these behaviors or traits or even physical characteristics support what the child is telling you about a past life. So that's another very strong indication that this is not a fantasy.
Hugh was probably somewhere around 3 years old, really not much older than that, and he would be playing and I would be laying on the bed with him or playing with him or whatever it was, and he would tell me about the city. It was a small town, and for probably, I would say probably the first maybe 10 times, I didn't even really pay attention. He was playing, he's telling me about this town. But one day he said, in this town, we were pretty well-to-do, Mom. We had a car. And that really struck me funny because we had 2 cars. Everybody we knew had a car. It wasn't a big deal to have a car. And why it would stand out, you know, that this was rich, that's the first time I decided, oh, this is kind of funny. So then I started asking questions. I asked him where the town, what did it look like? And he said it was a lot of wood buildings. And I asked him where it was, and he said at the foot of a mountain. And all through this, that's about as much as I could get, except little things like I asked what was the name of the town, and he would tell me, you can't understand what we called it. And that struck me funny. I can't understand what you know, things like that really started to hit with me. I started calling my mom and saying, Mom, you know, I've got to tell you what Hugh said today. And a lot of times if you sat down to talk to him, he didn't care to talk about it. When he wanted to, that's when the details came out. So after that, we sat down one night and I said, what did you do in this town? And he said, not much of anything. He had some money. He didn't work very hard. And I said, were you married? And he said, now this is the one point that I wish someone could have seen, Hugh. He looked up, he looked at me, and he went, yes, her name was, and I don't remember, but it was not Pam or Susie or Margaret or any of his aunt's names. It was a name that it was more along the lines of Marinka or Marusha. And he went, oh my God, was she beautiful. And that's the first time that I think I had chills. I mean, it was just, this was a 3-year-old little boy talking about his wife. One of the other things that I thought was strange for my 3-year-old son was that he told me that he had another mother, but he didn't like her as well as he liked me. And he felt that through his life she didn't really like him. But he was the one that got the money from the father, so she liked him, or she put up with him. Now those are my words, not exactly Hugh's. And then the other really chilling thing was I asked him what happened in this town, and he said that he died there. And I said, how did you die? And he said he was in his car and they were driving up a hill, and someone came out from the back seat and put a wire around his neck and tightened it until he was dead. And he said, Mom, I tried, I pulled at it, but I died. And then, I mean, even now, it's kind of an emotional thing, because he was such a little kid to be telling me this. And we didn't read stories like that. He was pretty much a Sesame Street kind of kid, so we didn't, that he would have gotten it from somewhere like that. And in the telling of it, it was really kind of matter of fact at that point. Yeah, that's what happened. He put a wire around my neck, and then I asked him what happened next, and he said, I went to heaven. And I said, what was it like in heaven? And he said the best way that he could tell me was it was anything, just anything. And he waited for me. And then when I guess I was ready or he was ready, he chose me, which I thought was a pretty interesting concept. And he likes me much better than the other mother.
Although it is not uncommon for children to remember and speak of a past life, especially where a traumatic death ended the previous life, a very few people retain their memories into adulthood or experience spontaneous flashbacks of vivid past life memories.
It was the first time I'd ever eaten Indian food, and I don't know why I'd waited so long to eat Indian food, but the smells in the restaurant just transported me. When I walked in the door, I thought, wow, that's incredible. Why have I never done this before? And so we ordered, and as the food arrived and I started to eat, all of a sudden I was somewhere else. Just that fast, just plunk, and I was somewhere else, and I was a woman. And I was sitting under a gorgeous decorated canopy on beautiful thick cushions. And there was a man to my right, and I knew he was my father. And there was a woman to my left, and I knew it was my mother. And then there was a young man to her left, and I knew it was my new husband. That this was my wedding ceremony. And there was a huge parade happening off to the right, coming up close to where we were sitting. And it was elephants. It was a whole string of elephants, and they were like completely decked out. All the bangles, all the trappings, with people perched on them and people walking beside them with their guiding sticks and everything. And there was music playing. It was like the whole village was there. Everybody, to the last child, was in attendance, and everybody was just celebrating and so happy. And I realized as I was watching this procession coming up towards our canopy that this was my dowry getting shared with the village, so the whole village could see what the dowry was and the gifts that my father was giving to my husband's family on the occasion of my marrying this man. And it was just incredibly profound feeling. I was so joyous I could hardly stay in my body. It was as if part of me was lifting out of myself. The joy was so intense, and the happiness of the whole congregation was outstanding. It's as if my father was so loved and so loved his village that he fed everyone and gave gifts to everyone. He was so happy, and he was such a loving, caring person that he shared it with every single person in the whole village. It was amazing, and it was indescribable. The joy was just so complete and so profoundly shared by everyone. And then it was over.
I'd never read a magazine or a book on the Civil War. What little I learned from school was mainly the North and South got in a fight over slavery, and that was pretty much it. If you were to ask me to name a battle, I might be able to come up with Gettysburg and Appomattox, and that'd probably be the extent of it. Probably a year after I saw the Battle of Antietam, the Ken Burns series, I happened to be in the area of Carlisle, Pennsylvania, not too far from Maryland. We were heading down that way. We were antique hunting, and coming close to the battlefield. So I asked my wife if it was all right if we made a little side trip over to the battlefield. She didn't mind. I wanted to see three places. The battle consisted of three battles, mainly the cornfield, the sunken road, and Burnside's bridge. We stopped at the cornfield, walked around a bit, looked at monuments. That was the end of my wife's historical career. She ended up sitting in the car, so the next stop we went to the sunken road, and I walked over to the sunken road, and there was a description on a tape recording there of what transpired during the battle. After I listened to that, I walked down into the road and took a left turn, and hadn't gone too far, and had a very strange experience. The only way I can describe it, it was sort of like a anxiety reaction. I describe it as if you could take the saddest you've ever been and magnify that about 1,000 times. It was that I felt that grief and anger, and I became very short of breath. I started crying, and I'm not normally prone to bursting into tears. About a year and a half after that experience, was at a friend's birthday party. Just happened to be born on Halloween. It's strange. His wife went to the nth degree to do his party up real nice, rented a restaurant, had a cartoonist doing caricatures, and a palm reader. She wanted to have dressed up as a gypsy, but the woman was very serious about what she did. She refused the gypsy costume. After going through the line for the have a cartoon done, I kept watching what she was doing with the people that sat down in front of her. She was reading their palms, and I thought she was very sincere and didn't repeat herself. And so I asked my wife after dinner, I said, would you like to go have your palm read? And she said, okay. So went over, finally got through the line. It was quite a long line. Got through the line, sat in front of the palm reader, and I noticed she started treating me and saying things to me different than all the other people that I had watched her with, and dropped my hands a few times and started asking me questions if I believed in past lives, and I kind of gave a yes, and she said, there's a question mark there. I said, well, can I go and pick up something I had played with 300 years ago? No, but I just think that there's more than what there is to this life, what we see. And I said, strange things have happened, and she said, like what? And I told her the incident that happened at the sunken road, and she proceeded to tell me that that's because I had been there, and I had been wounded there, and at that time she said, you even died there, but you were hovering over your body, and you were very angry, and you yelled, no. And at that time, I don't know why, and I didn't know until about a week later, I said to her, not yet. She says, yes, like not yet. She said, but you hung around for a long, long time. Well, she had to go on to the other people, and that got me thinking, and I went back through the line again and asked her 2 more questions. Why they were important at the time I asked them, I don't know. First question was, I asked her, was I dead? Was the soldier dead? And she said, oh yes, honey, you had holes all through you and all that. And then I asked her about some things that had happened to me in the service. But that got my brain thinking, and the next day after I'd taken my wife to work, I sat in my living room and I started thinking about what had happened to me at the sunken road, what the palm reader had said to me. And I remembered buying a magazine. This was a year and a half before. The trip was a year and a half before the party, so I had this magazine for a year and a half. It was Civil War Quarterly, the Antietam edition, a special edition that keeps being reprinted over and over. And I realized I had to have it at that time. I threw it on the counter for my wife to pay for it. I had never read it. And I knew exactly where it was. It was in with our phone books. I had always kept it with the phone books. So now I realize I have this Civil War magazine for a year and a half that I had to have, and I had never read it. I figured it was time to read it, so I got the magazine out and turned to the portion on the sunken road, saw a picture of pretty much where I had entered the sunken road. I started skimming down the page, came across a 2-word quote, and the hair stood up on the back of my neck. It said, not yet. Went back to the beginning and read down how Colonel John B. Gordon with the 6th Alabama had been in the sunken road, and he had told his men to hold their fire until the Union troops got right on top of them. And a lot of them were antsy and wanted to shoot and asked permission to shoot, and he yelled back at them, not yet, wait for orders from the center. So I found that odd, that here was the same quote that I had said to the palm reader. And I glanced at the page next to the page I was reading, and here's a photo of a General John B. Gordon. And I had read in the story he had been wounded 5 times, and I figured he was fatally wounded, and that was the end of that. But now I saw this picture that said General Gordon. He had been a colonel. He must have been promoted. He must have survived. When I looked at the face, the hair went up on the back of the neck again. I'm quite a bit older than he was when the photo was taken, but I remember what I used to look like when I had hair and good eyesight now. It's pretty much the face I've been shaving every morning of my life. So now I thought maybe I was going a little strange and wanted somebody else's opinion, and I took the book to work, and one of the co-workers there, I had them look at the magazine, not saying anything about the picture, and they asked about the picture, who the picture was, and I said, that's Gordon. He survived his wounding at the sunken road. And they looked at me and did a double take and said, he looks like you. And well, now I knew I wasn't crazy, or at least I had somebody else with me that was as crazy as I was. From that point on, the discoveries that I made about Gordon and myself, there's many, many parallels. Got markings on my face in 3 places where he was wounded during his war years. My mother and sister just happened to buy a house in Lafayette, Georgia, which is where Gordon spent his childhood just before going off to college. There was just so many parallels that I found that the only conclusion I could come to was I had been John Gordon in another life. It was kind of hard on my wife for a while. She thought maybe I'd go riding off on a horse or something, but I tried to. I've got her convinced that I am me and he was he. But that I may not be him now, but I was at that time, I believe.
And now just allow yourself to slow down a little bit, and then a little bit more. I'm going to count downward once again from 10 to 1.
When we do past life therapy, we do it for a very specific reason. Somebody's got a problem, a somatic symptom, a physical issue, a relationship problem, whatever it is that doesn't seem to go away, a phobia, a fear. And oftentimes what happens is that they have tried many other kinds of therapies and it still doesn't go away. Now that's not always the case, but in many cases it is. And they come and it's like, help me. And so what we do is we go back in time to the original cause of the problem. That's the idea, because all problems, issues in this lifetime didn't originate in this lifetime. They originated some time back. And so what we need to do is we need to trace those things. Now we do know, because we've been doing it for years, that we can go back into childhood and bring forth memories that are not on a conscious level. So why not further back? I mean, what difference does it make? It's the same process. It's just, and it's in the memory. It's in our memory banks. So we go back and we do that. Now the whole reason we do that is because until you get to the original cause of the problem and you can release the trauma on the issue, it gets locked in the body. It's kind of like when somebody comes up and surprises you and you go, like that, unless you release this, it's stuck right here. And that's what happens with all kinds of trauma. It gets stuck like right here. And so we go back and we release the trauma around it, and we heal what needs to be healed around it, and then we leave it in the body with which it belongs.
Past life therapist Roger Woolger uses a combination of Gestalt and psychodrama techniques rather than hypnosis to access past life memories. He guides patients into fully experiencing traumatic events from past lives, which are often found to be the root causes of their phobias and other symptoms in this life.
We, of course, look in childhood. The first place we look is this life. We don't go jumping immediately to the past lives. Often it is the case that people come to see a past life therapist when they've done years of conventional therapy and they've exhausted everything in their childhood as an origin of their symptoms, and they will say, well, I've done all this therapy, but I'm still terrified every time my little kid goes to take the school bus that I'm not going to see him or her again. But I've never lost a child, and I was never abandoned myself in childhood, but I still have this fear. Could it be a past life? Usually it is. We lie the person down, we get them to go into a memory of seeing their little kid go to the school bus, and we say, what's the thought you have? I'll never see him again. He's not going to come back. What is the worst thing that you imagine could happen? Once we get the imagination moving, things begin to happen. He's going to be killed. He's going to be killed. I know he's going to be killed. Let that feeling that your child is going to be killed take you into a fantasy. We can call it a fantasy. It doesn't matter what we call it. If it's real to the experiencer, it will move energy. So suddenly the person moves from seeing their little kid going to the school bus to being a woman in a crowd, seeing her child being taken and forced into a cattle truck while she's put at gunpoint and shot. It's a concentration camp memory where she lost her child and never saw it again. And she died then, she's back today, it seems, but she's still running the old story of losing her child, and she's now projecting it onto her current child. What is it about you? Why have they picked on you? Any idea? They think I'm what?
I'm not one of them. I'm just not one of them.
I'm not one of them. Say that again.
I can't fit in.
I don't fit in.
I'm not one of them.
I'm not one of them. How are you different? Different tribe, different race, different color, what?
I'm not, I do. I kind of look, I do. I look different. It's almost like I'm wearing, not like a white dress, but I'm wearing like, I'm like white, and they're drab. They're all very drab.
Yeah.
I stand out.
Yep. I stand out. I stand out. and they've turned on me.
Yeah.
They've turned on me, and they're all angry.
Yeah.
Yeah. What are they going to do? What are they going to do? Are they getting any closer?
Well,
Feel it, feel it, feel it. What are they doing? What's happened to your breathing right now?
oh, I'm stopping.
Right. Okay. Breathe. Breathe.
I fundamentally don't believe in reincarnation. It would fly in the face of my other non-theistic beliefs about, you know, God in general and specific gods specifically, that I just don't believe in reincarnation. I don't think that our specific souls or whatever a particular religion might call them have been here before and they keep getting recirculated like so much number 2 polyethylene.
People ask me if I believe in reincarnation, and my response is that it doesn't make any difference what I believe. The question is, because people sometimes can believe what they ought to, and sometimes they can't. What they love, hate, and desire prevents them from believing things that somewhere down deep they think they ought to. For me, the question is not, do I believe in reincarnation, but if I were a rational human being capable of regimenting my behavior and my beliefs according to reason, would I believe in reincarnation on this data? And my answer is yes.
I think a lot of things that some people think of as reincarnation, like deja vu, or I've been here before, or I lived this in a past life, are what I'm going to affectionately refer to as brain wiring. You know, not defects, but just brain wiring. When you look at the complex interconnections that make up even an average human brain, I mean, you're talking about something that some people have called the most complex thing in the universe. Okay? It doesn't strike me as amazing at all that, you know, intelligent, conscious, you know, thinking people might truly believe that something like reincarnation is true.
The imagination and the subconscious long-term memory of things that have happened in our own life and past life memories, I believe, all come from sort of the same general place. And I like to think of it as a grid that's outside of the brain and outside of the cranium. You know, it's not contained in here, it's out there somewhere, and we have a connection with that that's more like a spiritual connection. And that when we access those memories, which are real, past life memories, it feels like imagination, because when we imagine things, we're going to the same grid.
We've come to view the way past life memory operates as not very different from the way current life memory operates. In other words, when we recall or retell a scene from our childhood in this life, it's not going to be an exact photographic or filmic reproduction. The mind isn't a film camera. The mind is a creative organ, if anything, and it will piece together images to make a likely story. Remembering is exactly that, remembering. It is putting the pieces, the members together. So if we remember a childhood birthday scene, we may well recreate it in our imagination as we are retelling it. We call it a memory. It does indeed correspond to events that happen, and these are almost certainly images that were left in the psyche, in the brain in some way from the event. But the way we put it together is a little artificial. The same thing can happen in past lives. People can have fragments of a past life memory, and in order to make a complete picture, when they're telling the story in regression or under hypnosis, they may elaborate, they may embroider. It doesn't mean that therefore the story is untrue.
My fundamental beliefs really fall into the scientific method of rational thinking, in terms of, you know, you pose a question, you pose hypotheses, you test them. If if you're correct, you get demonstrably similar results every time you perform the experiment. If you don't, you keep looking.
I have a PhD in electrical engineering. I, as a physical scientist, don't have any problem at all dealing with this world of the hypnotherapist, and the reason I don't is that I have been able to resolve within myself the logic of what we're doing, and I can get predictable responses in many cases by doing certain things in certain ways.
Short of smoking guns, 8x10, in large glossies, physical evidence, how are you going to look somebody square in the face and say, no, I know that you didn't live that past life? I can't say that to a person who believes that that happened to him. I can't. I can believe that I don't think it really did.
We had a lady in a workshop who remembered very clearly the life of a painter at the time of the Renaissance in Italy. It was extremely detailed and sounded quite authentic, and she got the town, it was Siena, and she got a name which I don't remember at this point, but it was Italian sounding name. No one had heard of it in the workshop, and it seemed to be rather a minor painter. So she went to her local library in Berkeley, California, and looked up the painter and couldn't find any name, anything corresponding to that name. So then she went to the university library and tried the art department there. Still couldn't find the name. At that point she was ready to give up and thought she must have made the whole thing up. And a friend said, have you tried the Courtauld Art Institute or someplace like that? Somewhere else, San Francisco, or I'm not quite sure where. Anyway, she did research at a major art institute, and in a big 5-volume history of Italian art, she found the name. And then she got quite excited. And so she booked a holiday to Italy. She'd never been to Italy before. She got on the plane, arrived in somewhere, Milan, took a car to Siena, and when she got out of the car in the central square, she said, I know exactly where we are, and started walking around the town without any kind of a map. And she said, this is where it is, and she led her husband down a little street, and at the bottom of the street, in a medieval house that's still standing in Siena, mostly medieval houses, there was a plaque on the wall with that painter had been honored by the Italian tourist agency. Never been to Italy in her life.
I went to this seminar, the LRT, Love and Relationships Training, and I went because I was invited, and this person was talking to me about, all these things they would be doing, and I didn't want to look stupid. So I pretended like, oh yeah, I've heard of all this before, and I went to this seminar, and people started talking about past lives and energy this and enlightenment that, and I started getting a little nervous. And then they were standing up saying, well, in my last past life regression I realized, and then I thought, I'm in a room full of crazy people. So what happened was I was afraid that these crazy people would hurt me, and I figured I better pretend like I'm one of them. So they kept talking, and I was nodding my head as if, oh yeah, sounds like something that I know about. But inside I was thinking, don't let them know you're not one of them. These are the pod people. So what happened is during this seminar, we're supposed to have a what was called a group rebirthing session. And I had no idea what that session was about, what it was supposed to feel like, and or anything. So what I decided is, whatever it is, I'm going to fake it. They will never know that I'm not one of the pod people. In the beginning, I was acting out what I thought you're supposed to be doing, right? I'm laying there going, yeah, I'm feeling it. But something happened. I did start feeling something. My mind stopped working, my body took over, and I actually had this experience that it would take me an hour to describe it to you, but it was absolutely phenomenal. And after that experience, I realized I was one of the pod people.
There have been a lot of popular books about reincarnation, finding your soulmate, what are the origins of your illnesses karmically, many of them stemming from the 60s. The Edgar Cayce readings partly woke up the American public, and I think there's been an openness to Eastern religions more and more since the 60s, the discovery of yoga and meditation, Indian gurus coming to Europe and America. Consciousness has broadened a great deal. We're no longer so dominated by the Christian worldview. We accept that there are other worldviews, many of which include reincarnation, particularly the Indian religions, Hinduism and Buddhism.
Swami Vivekananda, the foremost disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, who was a 19th century mystic and saint, was a very young man when he left India to come to America. He had been motivated primarily in the search for funds. He had not come here primarily to talk religion or to preach a message or to bring any kind of particular religion to America. He had come in search of help for his downtrodden countrymen and for the poor of India. But when he appeared on the platform of the Parliament of Religions at the Chicago World's Fair in 1893, he found himself in a position to mix with the clergy and great literati and intelligentsia of Chicago and of the country. And he found that he was in a position to influence thought. He met important people like William James and many of the educators and prominent people of the time at the World's Fair. And he discovered that with the charisma which he had, he was able to hold audiences spellbound. There were crowds there of thousands of people, 4,000 people gathered in the hall at a time. In fact, they used to wait through long-winded sermons by other prelates and ministers, just for a chance to hear Vivekananda for a few minutes. And they put him on almost every program because he was so good. He became the star attraction at the Parliament of Religions. Now, one of the things that he introduced to America, well, I wouldn't say that he was the first to introduce it, because before him there was theosophy here. There were ideas of reincarnation from esoteric movements that had already arrived in the West from the East. But as you know, reincarnation is an Eastern idea primarily. And when he came, what he brought was a very reasoned and logical interpretation of reincarnation, willingly admitting that it was not his own experience of which he was talking, but he was delivering the message of the Scriptures. And one of the messages of the Scriptures was, of course, that reincarnation is not the last word. And that's probably his unique contribution to this subject in America. The fact that he believed in the all-pervasiveness of the soul. The soul is omnipresent, he told us. There is no place where it can go. So when we die, how can we go anywhere? How can we come back when the soul itself is everywhere and always? But that's a very high experience, a very high realization. Only a few people can ever reach that perspective. So he really took the Parliament by storm, and then he went on a tour, about 2 years tour of the East and the Midwest of America. On many platforms, churches, synagogues, he spoke, and had large audiences, and he was able to deliver this message of Eastern wisdom.
I don't know whether I was excessively conservative or whether this was something that was similar to what was going on in many Americans' minds at that time. But immediately when I ran across some of the basic concepts about reincarnation and karma, I had a distaste for it. I simply could not accept it, put it over on the sidelines. When I read through Mayor Baba's discourses on reincarnation and karma, I sort of said to myself, oh well, there's this subject, and I still don't feel terribly good about it. The first time I ever saw Baba face to face was in 1952 in New York. And there were several things that I knew instantly. And the first thing that I knew instantly, even though I just am not a psychic individual, I knew instinctively that he knew me better than I knew myself. And that was an astonishing thing to know, clearly. And the other thing that was even more startling, but it was the answer to an unexpressed lifetime desire, and that was I knew he accepted me totally, as I could not even accept myself. I think one of the most fascinating attributes of Meher Baba was simply the fact that the things that were important to you, they just came some way inside of you, and not through spoken words. He just was, and you felt the impact way down inside, and very often you didn't even feel the impact until you had left his presence and then started your normal life. And so one day, I remember when I ran across again the word reincarnation, and attached to that, inevitably, karma, I just suddenly knew inside of myself, this was my mathematical nature, that the only way the equation of creation worked out was for reincarnation and karma to be a fact and carrying it along. This is very clearly explained by Meher Baba. He simply says that as a human being, we have, I always think of it as 4 things, important basic parts of ourselves that are lined up vertically, and at the top of it is what he calls the drop soul. And then associated with the drop soul, certainly by the time that one has reached the human stage of evolution in this reincarnation process, the individual drop soul has a very clearly delineated mental body, a very fine vibrational mental body, and then somewhat more dense subtle body, which tends to be more in the energy and emotions sphere of creation, and then our physical body that we know so well. Baba simply says that each time there is a happening, an experience, an occurrence in the life of an individual human being, a drop soul associated with these bodies, the record of that is stored, established in the mental body. When the physical body finally is worn out, just like some clothing or a car, and it just can't function anymore, then it so-called dies. Nevertheless, the drop soul God continues to be closely joined with and associated with the mental body, and the subtle body still remains. And he says this combination of threesome then go to something called the Astral Plane, which he says actually is not a plane or a separate world, but something that I call in my physics jargon an interface between the subtle and the physical spheres. It's not in the subtle, it's not in the physical, but it's in between the two. Bob's not the first one who's pointed out that when you die, drop your body, leave your body, that you go through something, let's say, like a motion picture record of what has occurred in the life that you have just gone through. And Baba says that you go through it terribly vividly with much greater emotional experience than even when the original experiences were there. But out of all of this then, what remains then, the drop soul, the mental body stored, but with this just past lifetime sort of burnt to a cinder, to an essence, to its essence. And he says that's stored as inherited wisdom, and from one lifetime to another it's stored and accumulates, stored in the mental body, and in that same mental body are stored still the recollections, the history of what the previous lifetime was, and the previous lifetime, and the previous lifetimes. Someone says, well, let's try hypnosis and see if we can do it in that particular fashion. Meher Baba is fairly clear, and I'm afraid maybe for many people's taste, a bit frighteningly clear on this. There is a wall between the consciousness of the present life and previous lifetime stored records. And he said, actually, it's for a pretty good reason, because the variety and also the strength of those previous lifetime recordings is so varied, so complex, and in many cases oppositional. This lifetime is way over here, and that lifetime was way over there. And if all of a sudden we break through the protective wall and these things come out, you know, he said, this can be, or would be if the individual has not done it, one of the most upsetting things that could possibly occur to him. And in the usual human state of emotional being, the individual is just not strong enough to encompass and to be able to handle and digest and then go on beyond these tremendously varied functions. So Baba simply says, don't tamper too much with this protective wall. Now, he was talking primarily with people who were just for their own curiosity trying to recall previous lifetimes.
When children so earnestly talk about a past life memory, it has a profound effect on the adult who witnesses this, because they're convinced by what their children are telling them that the child has lived before. So if the child has lived before, that opens up the possibility of reincarnation for the adult. And in many of these cases, the parents had absolutely no belief in reincarnation before their children started talking about their previous lives. Once the children did and the parents acknowledged it, they had to reevaluate everything they had been taught about life and death.
There's many cases where you can find where the parents were quite apparently strangers to one another, where one or both of the parties did not want this to be the case. And then how do you explain it? And you start coming up with things like, well, maybe there's some sort of subtle cultural cueing going on here, you know, where the child will say something and the parents will elaborate on it and they'll get information. But after a while, the possibility of that seems to be a little more fantastic than the possibility that the child, I mean, given the long lists of detailed things that this child has remembered accurately about some stranger's life. So after a while, you begin to think, well, this is a real phenomenon. Whatever's causing this, there really are children who are just learning to speak, who seem obsessed for some reason about the life of a complete stranger, with very mundane and some often quite unattractive lives. I mean, why would a toddler be fixated on a 25-year-old mechanic who died in an unglamorous car wreck?
Not only is it rational to believe in reincarnation, but all the counter-arguments seem to fail. There's no good reason to disbelieve it. Now, when you have a strong argument that can't be refuted and you don't accept it after you've seen it, then you've acted irrationally. And I think that some people are acting irrationally and not believing in reincarnation.
If you watch TV, okay, and you listen to the media and basically the little boxes supposedly telling us what the world thinks. TV tells us that this is not so and only cuckoos and crazies think that way. But if you don't watch TV and you don't listen to that garbage and you meet people and you meet more people and you go to this seminar and you read books, then you find that there are so many people that believe this. So you have two things going here. You have a reality over here that says more and more people are believing this, more and more people are getting in touch with this. This is all part of what we humans have to do to grow and go to the next step. But if you look at that little box is saying nobody believes that except the cuckoos, and there's not that many of them, but we want you to know they're crazy. So there's two realities going on. It's like, which reality do you buy?